When we moved into our first house in the Chicago suburbs, I never imagined that the quiet evenings would feel deafening, or that my wife's smile would turn out to be a mask. I thought our marriage fit the American dream perfectly. Cozy weekends on the porch, road trips to Sox games, and Sunday services at St. Mark's. But soon I began noticing tiny cracks in her behavior. A barely perceptible irony in her voice when I shared my feelings, sudden flashes of hurt whenever I stayed late at the office. "You never listen to me," she'd say, and I'd agree, not even knowing what I'd done wrong. Every time I tried to talk about my emotions, she'd deftly change the subject. One moment she'd complain that I didn't notice how exhausted she was after work. The next, she'd accuse me of choosing football with my buddies over being present with my wife. I started to feel like the architect of our marriage, my blueprint crumbling. I read relationship books, tried to be that emotionally attuned husband, and yet I kept falling into her blame trap. Under her talk of my lack of warmth was a thinly veiled criticism, and I didn't know how to show more care without crossing some invisible line. We talked about intimacy needs, so I'd plan candlelit dinners, and she would forget our date, blaming an urgent call from a colleague or a sudden bout of fatigue. My map of love felt like it was tearing apart, and I kept rationalizing her behavior as stress and tiredness. But something inside me whispered that behind every complaint about my emotional distance lay something far darker. One evening, I caught sight of a casual text on her phone from AJ, calling her sunshine and suggesting they meet at a cafe near her office. I froze in the hallway, the world tilting on its axis. I wanted to believe it was a typo, a joke, a mistake, but deep down I felt the cold shock of betrayal. She was so practiced with her words that any direct question turned back on me. "You're just accusing me for no reason," she'd say, and I felt like the villain pacing through the ruins of our family. The nights grew short. I scrolled through her messages, desperate for proof, but every hint was wrapped in her seamless web of innocent excuses. She'd accuse me of mistrust, and I, head over heels and vulnerable, would apologize and promise to be more open and patient. Meanwhile, she was weaving a secret alliance with a client at her interior design business. Online chats, hushed work calls, meetups at the Starbucks on the corner, all orchestrated so I'd never suspect. I fell into an endless spiral of doubt. Maybe it was my fault our spark had died. I bought books on love as an art, signed up for online courses on emotional intimacy, even took extra vacation days to rekindle us. She kept insisting I was too career-obsessed and unaware of her needs, like a director scripting a play where I was always at fault and could never break free. Finally, I couldn't endure the game any longer. I found a therapist on Reddit, Dr. Rachel Parker, and admitted how crushed and deceived I felt. She said something that echoed in me. Sometimes, the one doing the blaming is hiding their own guilt. Those words hit me like a punch, and I started collecting evidence, bank statements, phone location logs, but I still hesitated to set a trap. Confirming my suspicions would mean shattering our family and wrecking my self-worth. That breakthrough came in Rachel's office, when she taught me to notice how my wife would interrupt me mid-sentence, how carefully she'd phrase her questions to leave me feeling wrong. I began keeping a journal. Every deflection, every catch in her voice. I learned to spot gaslighting, when she labeled my feelings excessive or unfounded, stoking my anxiety. The more I wrote, the clearer her manipulation became. Then I cross-referenced her important business meetings with AJ. Messages and the puzzle fit together. Every oddly timed conference was actually a rendezvous with him. That clarity hit me with equal parts shame and power. I realized the fight was just beginning, but I refused to remain prey to her psychological tricks. I remember the first Sunday I met Emily at New Hope Community Church, her pale blue eyes shining as she spoke about volunteering at the local shelter. I fell for her instantly, her compassion, her gentle voice, that radiant smile. We married, believing heaven had blessed us. But the shadow of mistrust crept in, bringing with it a poison I didn't see at first. Emily was a masterful victim. After service, she'd sidle up to me and sigh, as though the world were crushing her. "You don't see how worn out I am," she'd say as I walked in from work. "Maybe you're too wrapped up in your career." I'd cut back hours, bring her flowers on Fridays, book the corner table at her favorite Italian place on Main Street, Yet she'd always shake her head. Not enough. You lack warmth. And the only spark in her eyes came from the one-way glow of her phone. At a backyard barbecue with friends, she accused me of insensitivity in front of everyone, bursting into tears with that accusing look. Desperate to make amends, I promised to be better, though I had no idea how. Weeks later, I noticed she was staying late at the office more often. She claimed client meetings, but the hushed phone calls by the coffee machine told another story. I once sneaked around a corner and heard her whisper, "Yes, I'll be there." And it wasn't her boss on the line. Caught in the act, she smiled like an actress. "Just another coworker, don't be so suspicious." But I wasn't suspicious. I was searching for proof of my worst fears. Dr. Parker taught me to capture every nonverbal cue. How she'd avoid my eyes when I talked about our future, how her voice trembled when I mentioned vacations. My notebook turned into an Emily dossier: time, place, context, reaction. Still, I feared confrontation, terrified of destroying the fragile world we had left. Meanwhile, her chance meetups with AJ followed a pattern. She'd show up at the Daily Grind Cafe at exactly 8:15 a.m. each morning. I snapped photos from my car, her smiling at him across that little window table, more relaxed with him than she'd ever been with me. "Just work stuff," she claimed, but I knew she was lying. Day by day, I questioned my own memory. Had I really missed those signs before? I dove into articles on gaslighting, how manipulators twist facts and warp a victim's reality, and realized I'd become captive to my own love. I tried to break free, but Emily's web still held me tight. Then, 5 days ago, I gathered it all: GPS logs, screenshots, bank records. That night, when she came home late again, I threatened to expose everything. Her face went pale. Her smile cracked as if she'd never faced her secret self before. "You have no right," she whispered. But she'd lost the right to hide behind her lies. In that moment, I felt strength well up in me, not the strength of muscles, but the strength of truth. I saw how fragile her deception was, how easily one could escape once they knew. "I'll always listen to you, Emily," I said softly, "but I can't live in your fantasy anymore." Looking at her then, I understood that the darkest betrayal isn't physical cheating, but the betrayal of the mind when someone you trust distorts your very sense of reality. Restoring trust would be a long, painful road, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. That evening, after I laid out the proof, our home fell into an uneasy silence. She locked herself in the bedroom for hours. I sat in the living room clutching my printouts, feeling my own house become foreign. The next day I checked into a small motel by Lake Michigan to clear my head. Driving those country roads, listening to hymns on the radio, the refrain, "Be a light in the darkness," felt bitter. Emily's light had gone into her phone, and I was left in the dark. I wrote myself a letter: "You deserve the truth. Don't apologize for your doubts." A few hours later I called Dr. Parker and scheduled an emergency session in downtown Chicago. In her plant-filled office, lit by soft lamps, I finally let it all out. "I feel like I've lived someone else's life for months." Rachel listened, then asked the question that turned everything on its head. "What do you think Emily was hiding behind her blaming you?" I thought it through. She was terrified I'd uncover her with AJ, but even more afraid I'd see her real feelings. That's why she pinned the blame on me. Hearing her admit it, I realized I was looking at someone trapped by consequences she could no longer face. Someone who maybe never intended to betray me, but who couldn't stop once the lies began. Dr. Parker helped me map out my next steps. First, reclaim my own identity outside this manipulation. I had to conquer my fear of destroying the marriage and accept that trust can't be rebuilt if one partner keeps cards hidden. We decided I'd call Emily and set up a final conversation. My chest felt lighter. For the first time, I craved an honest talk. Back home, the living room was empty. She wasn't back from work yet. I cleared most of my evidence off the coffee table and left a note in plain sight. "Let's meet tonight at 7 at Harper and Ivy on North Avenue. We need to talk." I knew she couldn't refuse. That spot was too public for her usual evasion. While I waited, I reviewed my journal, skimmed the gaslighting guide Rachel recommended. I remembered her insistence: "Speak your truth, even if it hurts." So I practiced: "It hurts. I'm scared. I need the truth." When Emily finally arrived, her eyes searched for blame, but she sat in silence. I opened: I know you've been meeting AJ, I've seen the messages and I have proof. She looked down. I don't want excuses, I said. I want to know why. Her voice cracked. I was afraid you'd leave me. Our marriage meant everything, but I lost faith in us. I listened as she confessed her guilt and fear and realized she'd become lost in her own panic. We stayed until they turned out the lights at the cafe. She cried. I asked questions. I wasn't demanding apologies, I was seeking understanding. Outside under the street lamps, I said, we both deserve honesty. I don't know where this will lead, but I'm willing to try if you're willing to stand with me. She nodded, and for the first time I saw in her eyes genuine regret and hope, not the spark of AJ's texts. That night felt less like an ending and more like a new beginning. My journey back to self-respect and perhaps a deeper trust between us. I didn't know how it would turn out, but I knew I wouldn't let manipulation rule my life again. The morning after our Harper and Ivy talk was heavy, as if our words still hung in the air. We rose together but felt miles apart. Over coffee, I watched her hands tremble and saw guilt in her eyes. I wanted to rush across the table and say, we'll get through this. But I knew empty words would only widen the rift. 2 days later, we saw Dr. Adams, the marriage counselor at Grace Fellowship. His clinic smelled of lavender, and a small fountain burbled in the corner, as though welcoming us back to safety. He laid out ground rules, no blame, only listening and reflecting. Emily spoke first, her voice shaking. I was terrified of my feelings for AJ and didn't know how to handle the guilt. I replied, I felt betrayed and confused, but I'm here, ready for honest dialogue. My voice trembled, but it was the truth. Each week we did homework, writing gratitude letters, noting 3 moments we felt warmth for each other, journaling our emotions. Emily surprised me by leaving her phone dead on the kitchen counter, saying she refused to let me live in fear. It was a small gesture, but I held my breath all day, expecting her to regret it. When nothing happened, hope flickered in my chest. Midweek, I mentioned counseling to Mike, my little league buddy, over a beer. He slapped me on the back. Sounds like Emily really wants to save your marriage. But remember, trust is built brick by brick, not in one go. I took that to heart. No demands for perfection, just patience. Sundays I returned to New Hope Community, sometimes with her, sometimes alone to pray for clarity. At a men's group workshop on gaslighting, the session, How to Recognize Manipulation and Not Get Broken, hit home. I admitted out loud, I let myself get backed into a corner, thinking my feelings were wrong, and she was the only one who knew the truth. The solidarity in that room was healing. I wasn't alone. A week later, I found her phone again on the counter, unlocked, with AJ at the top of the recent calls. My heart pounded. My mind warred between old pain and this new fragile trust. I could assume she was still playing games or honor our pact of openness. I chose the latter. When she came home, I calmly held out her phone. Is this accidental? I asked. Fear flickered in her eyes, then genuine sorrow. We talked again, under the rules we'd set. She said it was a misdial, she didn't clear the log. I saw her struggle between truth and fear. Now, writing this at my desk, I see recovery as a dance between doubt and faith, between love wounded and love healing. We're learning to live again, creating new rituals where secrets have no place, but forgiveness and honesty do. One warm evening, walking home from a Grace Fellowship service, I felt a new ease between us. Our steps along the lantern-lit street weren't just taking us home, they were leading us toward rebuilding trust. Emily held my hand differently now, without reproach, with a hopeful tremble, as though afraid to shatter what we'd worked so hard to restore. Not long after, Dr. Adams invited us on a weekend retreat in northern Illinois woods, a tech-free haven where couples practice step dialogue and nonverbal empathy exercises around a campfire. It was the perfect trial by fire. Conquer fear and learn to read sincerity. That first night, as we sat by the flames, Emily leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on us." The scent of pine and burning wood filled my lungs, washing away years of hurt. We practiced silent gazes and answered, "How do you feel me right now?" She'd say, "I feel joy and fear both." And I'd answer, "I feel your caution, but also your longing." These simple acts chipped away at the walls around our hearts. One starry night, I found Emily under the sky, tears in her eyes. "I've always been so afraid of being alone," she confessed. That's why I tried to control your feelings instead of being honest. Her voice held no facade, just raw confession. I wrapped my arms around her. Words weren't needed. Back home, we carried those retreat lessons into daily life. Phone-free breakfasts 3 times a week. Dedicated time to share not only schedules but the emotions we carried. One morning we listed 5 things that made us happy today, and number 1 was simply sitting together at the table. Yet old wounds still throbbed. At the mention of AJ, Emily would flinch. Instead of avoiding it, I sat with her under our holiday lights and asked, "Tell me how you got involved, and why you risked repeating it despite our love." She opened up about the emotional refuge AJ offered, the validation she craved but forgot to seek at home. I listened without judgment, knowing her honesty was the next cornerstone of trust. Then came the final note. "We need to talk," from AJ. Emily showed it to me unafraid. We dialed him together and I spoke firmly. "This ends now. You and Emily are done." He stammered excuses, but my resolve was clear. No more pawns in someone else's game. Afterwards, we turned off our phones and held each other, knowing we'd weathered the darkest night of our marriage. 5 days later, I felt the tension finally start to lift. Over hot cocoa on our porch, her shoulders relaxed. She no longer darted for her phone every few minutes. We'd survived gaslighting and infidelity, and we were learning to breathe freely again. The next morning, I attended New Hope Community Service, not to find comfort, but to give thanks. The pastor spoke about forgiveness. Love covers a multitude of sins, 1 Peter 4:8. I clutched a note Emily wrote, promising to start over with genuine repentance. Tears blurred my vision. I realized forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the greatest strength. At the church potluck, Emily stood beside me serving food and whispered, "Thank you for staying." I took her hand and said, "I'm not perfect, but I choose you every day." That simple declaration carried months of struggle behind it. Over the following weeks, Dr. Adams's sessions felt less tense. We tackled money talks without fights, set up a shared family calendar for work, school, and, crucially, our weekly honesty dinners, where we speak our fears and feelings without interruption, promising only to say, "I hear you." One evening, while we made pizza in our cozy kitchen, Emily showed me a text from a new client thanking her for her work. I didn't feel a twinge of jealousy. Instead, I said, "I'm proud of you." That moment proved I'd released the old fears. Trust isn't control. It's knowing our choices are ours to make. A month later, we were invited to mentor a young couple in our church. Dr. Adams recommended us as an example of weathering major trials. We agreed, eager to help others avoid the mistakes we made. In our first meeting, we spoke candidly about gaslighting, losing yourself in someone else's story, and the importance of seeking help early. Their grateful eyes mirrored questions I once asked myself. 6 months from that first suspicious text, so much has changed. We celebrated our second wedding anniversary, surrounded by friends and family, toasting not only to many years of happiness, but to the power of forgiveness and honesty. The pastor presented us with symbolic keys of trust, 2 angel figurines holding a heart, reminding us that the doors to our marriage must always be open to each other. Looking at Emily by candlelight, I'm amazed by how fragile love can be when betrayal rips it open, and how fierce it becomes when nurtured with care and understanding. Our journey is far from over. We know old wounds can still flare up, and that tending to a marriage is daily work. But now we have the tools. We listen, spot manipulation, and most importantly, we rebuild trust from the ground up. If you're reading this and you felt the sting of betrayal yourself, know you're not alone. Beginning is always hard, but the first step, acknowledging the problem and committing to honest dialogue, can be the spark that ignites a new flame of love. Thanks for hearing our story. If you'd like to know more, like the exact exercises Dr. Adams gave us, excerpts from our honesty dinners, or how we handled unexpected crises months later, just ask, and I'll share more of our path to healing.